In round 8 of Norway Chess, the leader, Levon Aronian, had white against Anand. He pressed a little bit, but Anand defended very carefully, and that game ended in a draw. The player in second place, Hikaru Nakamura, also pressed a little bit with white against Wesley So, but Wesley was up to the task, and that game also ended in a draw. So Levon Aronian still half a point clear. But the other games were much more interesting, and I'd like to concentrate on the game between Magnus Carlsen and Sergey Karjakin. So it's a rerun of the World Championship match in November. Now, what would Carlsen do before going into round 8, I should say? He was at the bottom of the tournament table. So would he play it safe? Or would he go for it? Well, he's played as white. He's allowed a Nimzo Indian. So maybe that's already an indication that he's looking for a fight. And this variation with after d5 and taking on d5 and then playing knight e2 is certainly a way for white to play that keeps a lot of tension in the position. You see not many piece exchanges at all. And it's a very familiar kind of pawn setup here. Pawn chain. Well, actually quite popular with Botvinnik and later on Kasparov. And Karjakin plays in the approved way, just putting his rook in the middle, and this bishop retreats here where it can protect the king. And black is very flexible in this position. You might go for c5, you might play c6, so white castles. And Karjakin decides to play b6 and go for c5. But there's a lot of tension in this position, and clearly that's what Carlsen wanted, and he could have expected this position. In fact, Karjakin has played in exactly this way before with black. In this position, Jabava played bishop b5 against Karjakin. Anyway, in this game today, Carlsen played knight f4, which looks very logical indeed, to put a little bit of pressure on d5 and potentially open up the way for the queen. Which is exactly what happened. So you could say that white has got, well, about as much as you could expect out of this opening. You know, he's got his rooks in the middle, his queen is actively placed, the knights they're all looking at d5. But if we look at the other side of the coin, then Karjakin is also could be pretty happy with this position because his setup is very solid on the king side. There are absolutely no weaknesses there. Everything's well protected. And if you see he's well placed in the centre, he might look later on to put the knight in on this outpost e4. So everything pretty normal so far. Karjakin exchanged on d4 and played knight c7. So further supporting the d-pawn and looking to play the knight into e4. And Magnus thought for about 20 minutes in this position, because it's not clear what he's doing next, because, as I said, there are no weaknesses in black's position. But I think he found an idea to just create a little bit of pressure on the position. Bishop c2 is very nice. The bishop may pop out to b3. It might look to a4. Looking at this diagonal. Bishop d6. So Karjakin starts to activate as well. And now plays knight e4. Good move, hitting the outpost. So both sides, I think, playing well, and the game at this moment is roughly balanced. So there's a lot of pressure on d5. But white still shouldn't take that, because after these exchanges, then black wins the pawn back with bishop takes pawn, so it opens up this, and queen takes bishop. So material is even, but, well, I slightly prefer black in this position because that bishop isn't very good and there's a nice blockade here. So, of course, Carlsen didn't take that pawn, instead played h3, but now there is some kind of a threat to take on d5, which meant that Karjakin had a decision to make, and he decided to exchange off this piece, which was attacking the pawn here. So he played knight takes, but that, I think, that move was probably Carlsen was very happy to see, because that imposing knight has exchanged itself off, and that slightly improves Carlsen's pawn structure because a pawn has captured towards the middle, and that just gives Carlsen an extra option. Still, white is not better, but there's a slight imbalance in the position, which I think Magnus, well, you'll see how he exploits that in a second. And with that knight gone, it gives white a slightly freer hand on the king side, so knight h5. Nice move, but still everything is under control for black. Rook here, that means that black potentially is able to cover along the 6th rank. So bishop c2 pointing in the right direction, and bishop a4, good move from Karjakin. He just wants to trade off this dangerous light squared bishop. And now Carlsen thought for about 6 minutes, and well, he could just play very safely. He could trade off bishops. He could play bishop b3 very solidly. Instead, he played really ambitiously. And when he played this, I thought, oh boy, he's on tilt at the moment. You know, he's lost 2 games in the tournament already. He hasn't won any games, and he's just going for it with c4. This is a really brave move. Okay, let's see what the idea is. So this got taken. Why not? And then d5. So white is pressing through the middle of the board, hitting the rook, which comes to g6. So, of course, this could be taken, but, well, you can capture back, hitting the knight, and then you're going to take the rook here. Well, black is in no difficulties there. But that wasn't the idea. So bishop d4, this is the idea. So white, in sacking the pawn and forcing through this pawn through the middle, has created a little bit of space. So now his bishop can hit the long diagonal and attack the pawn on g7. So Karjakin exchanged bishops. Now, he's got to watch out here. If he played carelessly and, say, protected that pawn, then there's a very simple tactic. Bishop takes g7. So this is the point. And knight f6, forking king and queen. So Karjakin can't play the obvious move to protect this pawn. He has to do something. In the meantime, well, if, for example, black dropped the knight back to defend, then, well, an obvious move would just be to take here. And suddenly this is looking very pleasant for white with the rook coming down to this nice square. So Karjakin, well, he was up for the challenge. He played very actively. Queen a4, excellent move. So looking at these rooks here, that's nice, attacking this one. So rook cc1, the rook came back, and Karjakin said afterwards, he said objectively he thought he was better in this position. He was a pawn up, and he thought that he was solid enough on the king side. He could play knight e8 here. Instead, well, he played very ambitiously. He just took that pawn off. But actually, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, Carlsen also played very bravely. He hacked off the pawn on g7. So he's given up bishop and knight for rook and pawn. But of course, this blows open black's king. Now, he could play rook takes c4, but he didn't want to slow up his attack. He played queen h4, hitting the h-pawn. And now, very prudently, Karjakin decided he needed his queen to defend. So the queen is coming back. So it's very logical. I should say that by this time, both players were down to, I would say, something like 2 or 3 minutes to get to the time control of move 40. Remember, there's no increment. So time pressure is quite serious. Now, if Carlsen wanted a draw, he could just check with the king. And this is a draw. The king goes back because, and then queen h6. The point is, if the queen interposes, then rook e1 wins material. So he could have had a draw, but Carlsen more ambitious. He just took the pawn. Well, it's a very logical move. You're looking to swing the rook across the board. You're also looking down here, maybe rook c6. So the pressure definitely on black in this position. Now, to my eyes, Karjakin played a very natural move, knight e8. Defending the bishop, covering important squares around the king. And the king and knight, they complement each other very well in defense. Afterwards, well, it was established that king g7 is a very interesting move. It's a very unusual move, of course. This is computer assisted, with the idea of putting the king in the corner. Now, in the corner, it's actually pretty well defended with the queen on the long diagonal. And, well, of course, white has compensation for the material investment, but, well, a very interesting defensive idea. But Karjakin played the human move, knight e8. Then rook e1. So potential threats sometimes to knock out the knight, also sometimes preventing the king escaping. So it's a very logical move. Queen f6 from Karjakin. Now there's a bit of a trap here, of course. First glance you think, oh, we can knock out the knight, take the queen. Can we do it? Rook takes knight. Here, no. Rook e1 mates. The kind of thing very easy to overlook in time pressure, but Magnus saw it. He played queen h7. Of course, if the queens are exchanged here, then suddenly black is better in this position. So here, all three results are possible. So Carlsen playing very bravely here. Again, Carlsen wants to avoid a queen exchange. He could play queen f5, but, well, probably a draw would be the likely result there. But Carlsen, he's ambitious. He's still playing for a win. So he withdrew his queen. And now he swings the rook across. So still, both players in time pressure, still got to get to move 40. They're on move 36 at the moment. Bishop c5, the counter-attack starts. Bishop c5 on an excellent square, supported by the pawn. Now, pressure on f2, so Carlsen just defends that. Queen comes across. g3, so this is all very time pressury. If queen h3, then not rook h4 because of queen takes g3 check. Remember, there's a pin. But instead, after queen h3, queen f5 is a very powerful move, threatening a discovered check. And if the queen goes back, then rook h4. Well, white has a really powerful initiative there. So instead, Karjakin played the best move, knight f6, rook h4. That was the idea of g3. And now king g2. So the king is safer, the rook is on a more dangerous square, and Carlsen playing king g2 reaches the 40th move. And Karjakin was down to his final seconds to make his 40th move, and he played queen g5, looking maybe to take the pawn, but this was a risky move. Rook e8 looks, to my eyes, a much safer move, just to chop off a pair of rooks, and that will, of course, diminish white's attacking chances. But queen g5 played. And now Carlsen had the luxury of being able to think after move 40, so 50 minutes gets added to their clock, so he could think things through, and he came up with the best move, queen c3, putting pressure here on this diagonal, and looking to play rook e5 and sending rook number 2 into the attack. So, for example, after, in this position, if black were to play queen d5 check, apologies, queen d5 check, then king moves over, and suddenly rook e5 is extremely dangerous, looking to play rook g5, and white should have a winning position there. If rook e8, you want to trade pieces, but this also isn't really satisfactory in this position, because after this, queen here, and this is looking extremely dangerous. In fact, the best move is probably just to come back here with queen g7, but it's still an extremely tricky position. Instead, Karjakin played bishop d6, well, obviously preventing rook e5, but unfortunately for him, allowing something devastating. Check forces knight g8, otherwise the rook is lost in the other corner. Now rook e4, and this is deadly, threatening to swing over rook number 2 into the attack. And if queen takes d5, of course that's a pin, but queen f3 is the end of the game, threatening a deadly discovered attack. And if the queen moves out of the way, well, queen g5, rook g4 is the end, or queen c5, well, queen f6 is an absolutely deadly move in that position, threatening, for example, queen h6 mate. So Karjakin tried queen g7, but rook takes g8 was a crushing final move. So if king takes, then rook g4 obviously wins the queen, and if queen takes, then queen f6 is a very nice final move, well, not quite final, hitting the bishop, and if bishop here, then d6 threatens, for example, queen check, and rook g4 also threatens to promote the pawn, so that's the end of the game. So that's where Karjakin resigned. Well, I thought that was a really courageous game from Carlsen. He could have lost this game very easily, but he was, with the initiative, absolutely deadly, and well, a superb game. So that means that Carlsen now has 3.5 out of 8. He's off the bottom of the tournament table, and well, he's fighting hard, so all credit to him. So going into the final round, Aronian, half-point lead. He plays Wesley So with the black pieces, and Nakamura, half-point behind, has black against Caruana.